Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. A big thank you to SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform, for sponsoring every episode this season, including this one. Check out their services at squadhelp.com. My guest today is Myra El-Bayoumi, Strategy Director at Character, a San Francisco-based branding and design agency. Before Character, Myra held senior strategy positions at Landor, Siegel+Gale, and Interbrand, which is where I met her. Myra also holds an MBA from the University of Toronto Rotman School of Management. Given Myra's experience, I wanted to get her perspective on similarities and differences between top-tier brand consulting firms in their brand strategy approach, philosophy, and deliverables. And I also got her personal point of view on what should and shouldn't be included in a brand platform. Her answers may surprise you. Here's Myra El-Bayoumi on How Brands Are Built. Myra, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Rob, for having me.
So you've done brand strategy work at Interbrand, of course, where we met, but then also Siegel+Gale, Landor, and now you're at Character. Mm-hmm. So I'm familiar, of course, with Interbrand and with Siegel+Gale, but I haven't worked at Landor and I haven't worked at Character. So I'm just curious, in your experience across those 4 consultancies, how similar or different did you find the approach and processes and tools for brand strategy work?
This answer will probably and obviously betray my current bias, but I think there are a lot of similarities across the first 3, and not in a bad way. They're all big global consultancies. They have, nuances to their approaches, but in general, and I think in a good way, their goal is to solve the client's challenge at a scale and via a process that is relatively similar.
So what's different about Character? I should say that, of course, Interbrand, Siegel+Gale, Landor are sort of some of the big boys, I guess, out there. Character is smaller, but one of the more well-respected smaller consultancies out there. So is it different? How is it different?
Yeah. All those things are true, and I think I'm better equipped to see the value of a place like Character because I grew up in those big shops. Mm-hmm. Character was born in a flexible and fluid and let's just solve the problem mindset. And so the perks are that we just get to focus on that. We don't have to be bound by this is what the model has to look like every time. This is what the process has to look like every time. We get to say this is the problem we're solving. And if we want to blow up our process in service of solving that problem better, it's not only allowed, but encouraged.
And what do you think is different from the client's perspective, working with, I don't want to pick on any of the bigger consultancies, but working with a consultancy that maybe has more of a rigid or traditional process versus working with a Character where things maybe are blown up a little bit in terms of process on occasion?
Yeah, I hope that they feel a singular focus on our side to working together with them toward a shared goal, and permission, again, on their side and on ours, to push the buttons necessary to achieve that goal. So we get to call bullshit on each other internally and across our client agency relationship. We get to go experience those things in the world together. So I would hope that they feel a level of commitment from us that reflects the almost laser-focused passion that we get to bring to the problem because we aren't bound by the process. Right. Also, really tactically, they experience the speed. We get to do things way more quickly. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something a few minutes ago about going out and seeing something in the world as a source of inspiration, maybe, or information. Can you just give some examples? What do you mean by that? And it sounds like maybe the client joins you sometimes for that step. Yeah,
so we talk about it in 2 ways. We talk about getting inspired on purpose. So yes, inspiration can come from anywhere, but we have to make the concerted effort to go to whatever we define as anywhere. And we also talk about these ideas of working from culture, that what we bring from our outside lives and the way we spend our time as sort of creative professionals, even though I'm a strategist, I forget to call myself creative, I hope. We get to bring that in and allow that to influence our work. So some examples, we recently worked with a guided meditation brand called Core Wellness. They'll be launching a retail space here pretty soon where they will host classes. And we went as a full team and meditated together. So that feels like getting inspired on purpose, something that we needed to do to build empathy and be smarter about the brand we were building. Another example of that is we're working with a male fertility brand, and it's really easy to say, we're in San Francisco, we're in this incredibly progressive town where we want to, I won't speak for everyone at Character, although I think I kind of can. We really want to be part of the gender equity discussion and moving away from toxic masculinity and all of these social and political issues that feel especially acute and people are especially passionate about in the Bay Area and other coastal cities. But to be successful with a client like that, we went out of our way to seek out men who have differing views than we have, who have differing cultural pressures from their own respective backgrounds, even though they might be within the United States. So it's our job to say, I might feel this way, but to do service to this challenge I'm trying to solve alongside my client, I have to go speak to someone who has the exact opposing political view to me, or the exact opposing religious view to me, or whatever the case may be on those sort of cultural and social influences that we bring to the problem.
And this is all outside of what you would do sort of traditionally in a discovery phase of a project, right? So yes, you might be interviewing customers or potential customers of your client anyway, and you do that at Interbrand, I would think, or Landor, Siegel+Gale, but you're saying there's this sort of extra space in the process for outside of that standard operating procedure, you're looking for other ways, other sources to inform the process or just inspire the work.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that the other shops wouldn't do that. I think it's just a critical and unskippable part of the process at Character. So that little extra piece looks different from client to client, but exists as a personal exercise for the team who's working on it to make sure we do every time.
And some of the examples, or one of them that you just gave, was somebody with opposing views to you. Is there something about those experiences specifically being a little bit uncomfortable that makes them more important or more impactful? Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. We're not looking to speak to those people to convince them of something or dissuade them from something, rather to broaden our own aperture in terms of having empathy and understanding that in the case of that brand, to be successful, they need to be able to speak to men who are united in a pursuit of fatherhood in some capacity, regardless of those other views, right? So it was just in that case our job to blow up our own biases that we consciously and subconsciously are bringing to the equation.
Right. So you've talked a little bit about the difference in the process at Character, but is the output, the deliverable, and I know it differs from project to project, but I would assume that you have some kind of brand platform or brand strategy documentation or something that comes out of this.
Yeah.
Does that feel relatively similar to what you've seen across these other agencies? Is it somewhat different, very different?
I think it depends. I mean, it's not going to blow anyone's mind in how different it is.
Right, because what would be the point?
Yeah, exactly. Not different for different sake.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. When we are kicking a project off, in any project, our focus from a positioning and strategy standpoint is to answer two questions. Why does this brand exist beyond to make money in the world? And why should the world choose this brand? And those might not be the same answer. They might, but they always work in tandem. And for us, arriving at those answers is the only important thing. And so sure, there's a framework that we tend to use. We flip things around in it, often enough to make it more digestible and more relevant for the client based on their particular situation. But we're always answering those questions. And I think where there's, again, a little bit of a difference in my personal experience or personal professional experience is that we spend a lot of time on that second question of why the world should choose this brand, anchoring it in sort of two ways to finish that question. Why should the world choose this brand today? And why should they continue to choose it over time? And so that means we're setting strategy that is evergreen for the future, but that is also relevant today based on the cultural conversations and tensions with which that brand intersects. So we get to spend a lot of time saying, here's all the stuff impacting this conversation. What conversations do we think this brand should be leading? Where should it have perspective? Where should it stay silent? And where should it be sort of screaming from the rooftop?
Great. So you have to do the work then to understand current trends and where it's situated in terms of those, but also thinking ahead a little bit about maybe future competitors or just how those trends, the direction they're pointing in, if such and such a conversation dies on the vine or becomes less relevant 3 years from now, then how is this brand still going to maintain its own relevance?
Exactly. And it's the most fun part. I mean, speaking for me.
The trend watching or the future proofing part?
I think the identifying the cultural tensions and therefore who are we for, who are our foes, and if we were sort of to achieve our purpose tomorrow, what would that mean?
And do you think that that kind of thinking is just as applicable for B2B brands? Or, I mean, it's immediately clear that for the male fertility company, for example, that's going to be easy to talk about, or maybe hard to talk about, but it's going to be easy to connect to the broader culture. Whereas if you're doing something for some esoteric software product that's only behind the scenes, does the same process and do the same questions apply?
Short answer is yes, because we operate, I think, with a similar view to the majority of branders, which is that humans make decisions, whether they're making those decisions on behalf of themselves, on behalf of a company, a government, something else. They're still making decisions, and the way humans make decisions is based on emotion, especially when all else is equal. So the process is more or less the same. We don't delineate in an official capacity between a B2B brand and a B2C brand because we think they should be serving or striving for the same goals, let's say. But one of the examples of a B2B brand that we've worked with who I actually think does the brand experience thing pretty well is Dialpad. And you might not know Dialpad, but you probably know Uber Conference, which is one of their products. And Uber Conference has that famous hold music.
And I've been waiting on my friends, yes, I'm waiting on this conference call, all alone, and I'm on hold. Well, yes, I'm on hold. I hope it's not all day. Hey!
And so that's an example where, and we didn't create that, so I won't take any credit for it, but we know those people now, and we know how well that hold music, what it says, the sound of it, and the fact that it exists in the first place represents the spirit and the DNA of who that company is. So sure, the actual client making the choice to engage with Dialpad may not be thinking, oh, that hold music is cool. But we all know, as people who work at companies, that conference calls can be really shitty, and having something to make you chuckle during it has incredibly disproportionate impact.
Any little bit helps.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to those two questions. You said it was, why does this brand exist, and why should anybody choose it? I suppose one way then of creating a brand strategy for a client would be to just really clearly and articulately answer those questions based on research, right? Based on hopefully valid information about the marketplace and what the consumer wants and so on. But once you have those answers, you need to, or your clients need to be able to do something with that, right? So oftentimes that might involve design or creating some kind of experience, whether that's online or in real life, or it might involve the product. How do you help clients get from here to there? Is there, do you find that you need to help them bridge that somehow? I know different companies use experience principles, or sometimes personality traits play a role. Do you have any kind of consistent process for that?
Maybe consistent in thinking, but consistent in sort of shape of deliverable. I think no, in a good way. We do include almost every time behaviors within our positioning work. So if this is our purpose, if these are the things that we believe, if this is why the world should choose us, how should people behave within the organization to serve that purpose and pursue that purpose? And also along the lines of experience principles, the way you just talked about, how are those behaviors applied to the brand itself? We, of course, do the verbal identity and the visual identity, and that helps take the positioning or whatever the whole of the strategy work is into a real place. But I think what becomes even more exciting is when we do these activation workshops, which we don't do every time, but whenever we can. And a lot of shops do something similar, where we actually bring our clients in once we've nailed the positioning. Maybe we've nailed the other pieces as well, or maybe we're earlier in the process, and we sort of set up stations in our conference room or whatever space we happen to be in that are reflective of specific channels or important touch points for that brand.
Okay.
And we go around, set up, huge cross-functional teams from the client side, our entire cross-functional team who's worked on it, and brainstorm the implications of the positioning on each of these things. So while we may not actually do influencer strategy, we do plenty of brainstorming on what social media should look like and what are the types of influencers we would want to work with. What are the implications for how the experience should come to life in a retail environment?
This episode of How Brands Are Built is brought to you by SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform. Here's how SquadHelp works. You launch a naming contest to engage hundreds of naming experts. You're guided through an agency-level naming process that goes beyond traditional crowdsourcing. The platform uses AI and includes name validation features such as audience testing, trademark validation, linguistic analysis, and quality scoring. And SquadHelp doesn't just do naming. You can also use their platform for taglines or slogans, as well as logo design. To launch your naming or slogan or logo contest today, go to squadhelp.com and start receiving custom suggestions instantly. SquadHelp, company, brand, and business name ideas by experts. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rev.com, offering fast, affordable, accurate audio transcriptions and captions. I use Rev all the time to transcribe episodes of this podcast and also for recorded interviews I conduct during brand strategy projects for clients. I've tried some other services, and I keep coming back to Rev because their transcriptions are the most accurate I've seen, their turnaround time is less than 24 hours, and transcriptions cost just $1 a minute. Right now, Rev is offering listeners of this show $10 off your first order. To get your $10 off coupon, visit rev.com/blog/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's rev.com/blog/HBAB. Rev, transcriptions made simple. Last but not least, today's episode is brought to you by Audible. For listeners of How Brands Are Built, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's audibletrial.com/HBAB to get your free audiobook. Now back to the conversation with Myra El-Bayoumi. I want to come back to right at the beginning of the conversation. I know we're going in circles here a little bit, but you had said that the actual brand strategy model used at Interbrand, Siegel+Gale, Landor, Character, that there's some slight points of distinction, but by and large, they have the same ingredients and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I know it's really in the weeds, but are there components of any brand strategy platform that you think are really critical to have or that, you would feel like if you went to another agency tomorrow, let's say hypothetically, and they said, here's the framework that we use here, and something was missing from that, you'd kind of be like, what is this? You're missing X, Y, or Z, like it's incomplete.
Yeah, perhaps I'll answer that in the affirmative and in the opposite way. I think I would say if the purpose was missing, I would feel confused. I think it's very rare that that's missing, though. But the articulation of the North Star feels to me the most crisp at the expression of the purpose of why this brand exists beyond to make money. So that feels critical.
Right. Even if they call it something else, just having that in
Exactly.
there. Yeah.
Exactly. The place where maybe the question you didn't ask is the things that I don't like.
Yeah. No, definitely want to hear that.
I have an aversion to anything that lacks precision and focus and clarity and sharpness. And so for me, when I see things like values or even personality traits, let's say, I feel like we are out of the world of brand positioning and into the world of either a reflection of what matters to the business or a beginning of how we articulate and bring the positioning to life. So to unpack that a little bit, to me, values belong to the business. They're good to have. They're important to have. But to say that the business values honesty and transparency feels useful. To say that the brand does feels general and like I haven't learned something more about this brand. And if I am a person out in the world, which I am, who's trying to see myself in a brand, that doesn't give me something to work with. It feels generic almost. So I have an aversion to those sort of words.
Yeah. Do you feel like then would you say that the brand positioning or brand strategy work that you do could, however, influence the values that the business decides or even the language the business uses to characterize its values? Or would you say vice versa, that you want to know what the business's values are so that you can therefore create a brand strategy that makes more sense for that business? Or is it both, unfortunately? Is it just kind of work both ways?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Obviously, if that information is articulated, then of course it becomes a valuable input for us as we develop the positioning. I just think the positioning's job is not to define the qualities of the business. It's to go even sharper and even more precise and even more focused. Someone said to me very early in my career, strong brands clarify, they don't always attract. And so if the level of precision that is placed on the positioning does not serve to clarify, then it is not focused enough.
And so what do you say, I can guess, but what do you say to clients who come to you and say, well, I was taught in business school that we need these, 3 to 5 brand personality traits and you haven't delivered them. So it feels like this is an incomplete piece of work. Do you just explain your point of view to them, I assume?
Yeah. Short answer, yes. Longer answer is I do believe in identifying a personality, specifically when it comes to the verbal identity. Mm-hmm. And so it is important to have those guardrails, but they, to me, are not the answer to why the world should choose this brand. Right. They are the answer to how that North Star is brought to life across all of the senses out in the world.
Right.
I will say, maybe I'm speaking too soon, I haven't had that happen very often.
Yeah, I haven't had it happen on personality, certainly. I've had it happen on things like purpose and promise and value proposition and some of these things that, frankly, I think people get confused and some people use them interchangeably and some people don't. So I've had people say, well, you need to deliver a promise. And I'll say, but we've already delivered a proposition. And they seem like the same thing.
Yeah.
I guess what it sounds like you're saying, and I wonder if this is true, I wonder if brand personality as being sort of part of a brand platform and kind of packaged right up next to that positioning statement or that purpose, if that's a little bit of an old school way of thinking, because the way I've understood it is a lot of what brand personality is going to help you dictate is it's going to influence maybe visual design stuff, or it's going to influence voice, like you said, voice and messaging. Mm-hmm. But increasingly, it seems like rather than having one set of traits that you then try, as you might, to like interpret visually and interpret verbally and maybe interpret in other aspects of the experience, maybe it makes more sense to just not have that and just have your really clear, as you put it, and focused and sharp brand strategy. And then when you get to those other places, like now we need to create a brand voice and write some messaging, that's when you, instead of just going with some generic brand personality, that's when you create some, say, voice principles that are really specific to verbal communications. Right.
So that is exactly the process that we take at Character, and pretty similar to the process that I took it in my previous roles as well. So I wouldn't want to make that seem unique to us. But it does feel most right.
Yeah.
It does feel most right to leave the exercise of strategy to the job of strategy, which is to provide a filter for decision making.
Right.
And that needs to be one idea that is super crystal clear. And we can deliver that empathetically or cleverly or transparently and factually later.
I have a couple of, actually more than a couple of wrap-up questions here that I ask of most guests, and I'd love to get your take on as well. So the first is just any brands, and they can be clients of Character or not, I suppose, but any brands that you think of in your day-to-day life as having really great brand experiences or just really doing kind of everything right when you look at it as a strategist or as a consumer. What are those brands?
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the brand Billy. They sell women's razors.
I am not, but I love being introduced to new brands.
Yeah. Billy with an IE at the end. So that is not a character brand, although I would be so proud if we had done that work. They are an example to me of someone who's doing everything, pretty much everything right. And my experience with that brand has reflected it. Even if you go to their homepage right now, it has video imagery and copy that shows women with hair on parts of their bodies that they want to get rid of, whether that's leg hair or underarm hair or else other hair. And it's just about being real and building this brand and therefore the product for women.
Right.
Not to mention the visuals the visual identity, the verbal identity, it all just feels really aligned. It says we are eliminating the pink tax in an industry like this, but we also get that women have this burden of shaving if they want to ascribe to that burden or not. And if they're going to, then we're going to make something for you that handles the job rather than having, the beautiful leg with the blue colored stuff in the shower from Venus and whomever else that we've grown up seeing. It's nice seeing a razor that actually takes hair away, if you want to take it away, and a brand that says you don't have to take it away.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing for a razor brand to say, but to your point, pretty real. Is it, just curious, is it a direct-to-consumer, is it sort of a Harry's or Dollar Shave Club type of business model?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly that.
Interesting. I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Although not for myself, I suppose.
Yeah.
Out of professional curiosity.
Yeah.
Any books that you have read either recently or that you read early in your career, and they don't have to be, branding or marketing or even business books, but just things that have somehow influenced your work or the way you think about brands?
Yeah, I think my answer to this is a little bit of a cop-out. For me, the best reading for our space is reading about what's happening in the world and being engaged with culture and engaging in really just what's happening around us. That type of reading feels super powerful to me. I recently finished reading Mating in Captivity, which is Esther Perel's book. And that to me has been a tremendously enlightening book in life, but also in my work. And has nothing to do with branding. It just has to do with humans,
Yeah.
So maybe that's a cop-out response, but
no, not at all.
Strategists have to live.
Right. And I take it that if I asked you the same question 2 years from now, it would be another book. That's sort of your point, right? That it's just what's current to some degree.
Exactly.
Call it a cop-out, but I've gotten that answer from a few people that say they don't really, in fact, quite a lot of strategists seem to say they don't like reading anything about branding or marketing all that much. And a few people have answered similarly to you that it's more about just getting new information. And so I almost feel like there's kind of a new sub-question to this that I should be asking people, which is just where do you go for news or trends? How do you get news, I guess?
Yeah. I go to the obvious places, but I think the real answer for me personally is that I go to my team. I have these incredible people that I get to work with who are different to me inside and outside of work. And we, I think, do a pretty good job of sharing the events that we have recently attended or that we're going to attend and inviting others that we know will broaden our perspectives in some way. And so, I read that book because it was recommended to me. And sure, it's popular right now, but...
Sure, but a lot of books are popular. You got to have it some way to narrow it down.
Exactly.
That's great. And
yeah, exactly. So
that's a perfect segue into my last question here, which is just, I know that you are managing a team now, I think a growing team. And so I'm curious what kind of advice you give to whether they're junior people or people who are in the middle of their career or people that are just getting into branding. Do you have any advice or any tips that you share consistently?
Yeah, I do. And I am both lucky and burdened with doing a lot of interviewing. And often what I share is that branding is so relevant to our daily lives that to me, the best way to practice thinking like a brander is to look at what's happening in the world around us and view that as a brief. There is no more interesting time to look at the brand of the United States than right now and understand. But whether you're for or against it,
It's easy for you to say as a Canadian, an outside observer.
I know. But the same question applies to Canada actually right now.
That's
true. But really, it's look at what's happening in the world and pull apart the brands that are being impacted by all of what's happening in the world, good, bad, or somewhere in between. And train yourself to do the exercise of, if this were a company, I mean, they all are brands, right? So how would you describe it? It's an interesting question to ask, why someone should choose the United States today versus if you were to ask that same question 5 or 10 years ago. And how might we want the answer to differ 5 or 10 years in the future?
It's a little bit depressing to think about that, right? To think about the answer to that question right now, I'm afraid, from my perspective.
Mine too.
Well, thank you so much, Myra, for making time to do the podcast. And I know we'll stay in touch, but I hope to talk to you again soon.
Likewise. Thank you, Rob. It was super fun.
Thanks for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you liked the episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's an easy way to support the show and help others find out about it. To learn more about Myra and Character, visit charactersf.com. No spaces, just charactersf. Visit howbrandsarebuilt.com to see my notes from this episode, as well as a full transcript of the conversation. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time.